Welcome to the Safety and Risk Success podcast with me, Christian Harris. My guest today is Satish Lakhiani from Essel Acoustics. Satish is a noise and occupational vibration consultant, so he specialises in HAVS, and that's the subject of today's discussion. He's also had a career before getting into this field in engineering and thinking specifically about hearing protection in the military, so very interesting and relevant background to what he does today. So HAVS is a big problem. It's similar to SLIPs, my field of expertise, in many ways because it's often underappreciated. And so we talk about some of the statistics, we talk about some of the symptoms of HAVS, some of the steps that you can take to mitigate the risk and to try to be preventative because, as you'll hear, a lot of the injuries that are caused by HAVS exposure are injuries that once you get them, you're stuck with them for life. So it's a very big problem, serious thing, and Satish is doing some great stuff as he tells us and gives us a couple of case studies with clients to get their awareness up, engagement up, and exposure down. So I hope you'll enjoy this conversation. I started the chat by asking Satish, how big a problem is HAVS?
Welcome to the Safety and Risk Success podcast with Christian Harris. We believe that proactive safety and risk management powers business performance. Each week we explore this theme, sharing guests, stories, insights, trends, hints and tips. You can find us on all the major podcasting platforms, and video versions are available on YouTube. But for now, let's join the conversation with Christian.
It is a bigger problem than many people think because one of the issues with HAVS, or certainly in my experience, and what I've found out is that there seems to be a lack of awareness of it in industry. There are times when I do go out on surveys, carrying out risk assessments, where when you speak to managers and operatives, they're not aware of all these symptoms of HAVS. So when you bring it to their attention, they realize they have a bit more of a problem than they originally thought they had, as far as HAVS is concerned. So it is all a question of education and awareness training that brings it all to the surface. Right. That's what I found in my experience. Yeah.
And what would some of those main symptoms be then that you spot, but that people are not so aware of?
Well, one of the I'll just give you a rundown on the three main types of HAVS injuries. There are the three components of injuries. The first one is what's known as a vascular component of injury, where it's damage to from constant vibration of the vibrating equipment to blood vessels, particularly in the fingers, where when these blood vessels get damaged, the symptoms show up as finger blanching. In other words, the what's colloquially known as vibration white finger.
Yeah.
It starts off as, and this finger blanching is, it's sporadic or it's intermittent, often triggered by cold conditions. And what happens is that the tips of the fingers go white and like I said, triggered by cold conditions. And when the person returns to a warmer environment, then the original color of the finger returns, but in rather a painful manner. So that's one of the components of HAVS. It's the vascular component, and if it's left untreated, then what happens is that the temporary finger blanching tends to become permanent, and the blanching works itself down the fingers. That's an injury that's visible, and that's many people are aware of that as a component of HAVS.
Yeah.
The second component is related to nerve damage. And that is what's called the neurological, that's the neurological component. And this is the one that's not so often realized, because when you look at a hand that's got this component of HAVS damage, it looks like a normal hand. But the symptoms of this is the loss of sensitivity, is tingly fingers. And if it's left unchecked, this develops into something more serious where you tend to lose sensitivity in your hands. And normal everyday tasks like turning the leaves, turning the pages of a book become very challenging. And it's even thought that, one of the other things is that when you lose sensitivity, and you're not able to feel the difference between hot and cold. So you could end up even burning yourself without even realizing. So that's the second component. And the third component is what's known as a musculoskeletal component, where you have damage to the tendons between the hand and the lower arm. And that leads to a weakness in grip strength, which may compromise the safety of somebody who is using a power tool. So those are the three components. But the one that's most thought to be most disabling is the nerve damage component, or the neurological component. That's why because many don't realize that as a sign of HAVS. And that's why HAVS tends to be underestimated. I have had experience when I've gone on site where some of the operatives don't realize the neurological damage, the component of HAVS, and they've actually pointed it out to me, and I've had to make them aware of the fact that it is HAVS damage that you're facing. Now, the thing you have to be aware of is that certainly the first two components, the vascular and the neurological component of HAVS, beyond a certain stage, they are irreversible. There's no form of cure. Prevention is the only form of cure.
And I suppose those first two are sort of easier to spot. So the third one, the more serious one, is probably developed. Kind of once you've already got those two irreversible damages as well, and then it gets even worse from there.
Yes, it gets even worse. I mean, it's thought that the neurological component is the worst one of the lot, or the most disabling one of the lot.
Yeah. And in terms of the scale of the problem, I mean, how many kind of injuries, if that's the right word, or incidents are we getting a year? Any idea on that, or how many sort of fines or prosecutions? What's the sort of size and scope of the damages as well?
Well, I've done. I don't know the exact numbers, but every so often you do see these prosecution levels where you just see the level of fines that have been imposed, and certainly over the last 5 or 6 years, you've noticed a hell of an increase in fines, and I presume that's one of the reasons. One of the reasons for that was the introduction of the Sentencing Council guidelines, which took prosecutions to a different level. So now we're seeing prosecutions. I mean, there's going well into 6-figure territory. I think the record has been over £500,000, £600,000. So it's not far behind the kind of claims in your type of industry, Christian. So it certainly sticks out like a sore thumb when you do see these prosecutions. But certainly in the last, about 2 or 3 a year, I say 2 or 3 big ones a year. That's what I've noticed anyway.
I suppose it's interesting to compare to the world of slips, because similarly, what I do is kind of overlooked and underappreciated a bit. And I suppose the main difference is that HAVS is going to be more, well, this is my understanding anyway, it's more a employer issue, whereas slips is probably more of a member of the public kind of issue in terms of the volume of accidents and things like that.
That's right. Yeah, you're perfectly right there. That's right.
So why is this, Satish, still an issue? Because it must be, or well, perhaps I'm wrong in saying this, but I would have thought it was quite sort of heavily regulated and by the law.
Good question. One reason why, in fact, I've got here a quote on the HSE website. They've actually stated a reason as to why this hand-arm vibration may be underestimated. And if you just bear with me a minute.
Yeah, I remember you mentioned that to me, and when we were sort of going back and forth and looking at the notes. So yeah, I'd be interested to hear this, because it's interesting.
Yeah, just bear with me.
You're too well prepared, Satish. You've got too many notes, and
well, yeah, that's the problem. I think too many notes may. Well, what it is that they reckon that one reason why it is an underestimated injuries, because they don't recognize the symptoms. Or the other thing they recognize it's underestimated is because they don't realize that it's an industrial injury where they could get compensation for.
Right. Yeah.
So they tend to just ignore it or brush it off.
Yeah. Yeah. But a bit of a sort of macho, we're on a building site. We're tough.
That's right. Yeah, that's right.
Bit of tingling in the fingers. I'm not
Yeah,
going to complain about that.
that's part of the job.
Yeah.
That's part of the job, and that's unfortunately the way it is being approached.
Yeah. Are there any specific laws around this? Do you have to have auditing, or do you have to have certain tests done on your machinery or anything like that every year, or is it kind of a bit more risk assessment based approach?
It's risk assessment. I mean, there are specific regulations as far as hand down vibration is concerned, and it's the control of vibration at work regulations that was introduced in 2006, and it was introduced specifically for the employers to protect employees against the ill effects of hand down vibration. It's all risk assessment based, and the risk actually depends on how long the employer uses how long the employee uses the tool, and what the vibration level of the tool is. Right. So you might have a tool with a high vibration level, but if the operative uses it for a very short period of time, it might be less of a risk than if the employee uses a low vibration tool for a very long period of time.
Yeah, which sort of logically makes sense, doesn't it?
It's the dosage, effectively.
Yeah,
it's the dosage.
Yeah,
that you're looking at.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So where then do most organisations get this wrong? I mean, can't we just use PPE and it's as simple as that, and we solve the problem? Or I imagine there's much more to it than that.
Yeah. I mean, if anybody is thinking of using PPE for hand down vibration, I've got a bit of bad news for them. PPE doesn't work, or it's not considered to work effectively. So they have to look at other methods of. It's not like where you have hearing protection, where that to some extent does work if it's used properly or is maintained properly. But when it comes to hand down vibration, there's nothing there. So the focus is on actually control, whether that's to be a change in process or eliminating the process, or looking at new tools. I mean, now as that's one reason why manufacturers design or look to design low vibration tools, because they know that there's no effective form of PPE. Right. So the focus is on them, certainly from a marketing point of view, to design low vibration tools or safer tools.
Yeah.
Okay.
So there's a way of measuring, I guess, the vibration, and that's kind of what we should be doing in terms of trying to quantify the risk by thinking of the level of vibration within the tool, the exposure, and then the time exposure that somebody has to it, and sort of multiplying those together to get
quantify your risk effectively. Yeah. I mean, you can do that. I mean, there's no need to actually. You do actually have databases out there or information out there on the vibration level of the tool, vibration levels of the tool. Yeah. So it's not necessary to go out and do the measurement, unlike in your case, say for slips, where there is a quantitative measurement to be done to determine what the risks are. Yeah. In the case of hand down vibration, there are available databases online, and the HSC have got a very good table of indicative vibration magnitudes, which you can use for an initial risk assessment. Yeah. However, if you're using the tools differently in a very novel manner, or you're working on different materials, that may tend to give you different vibration levels. So maybe there might be merit in carrying out the vibration levels of the tools, or measurements of the vibration levels of the tools. And the other thing is then you have to determine the exposure time. But you got to be a bit careful, because that if you ask, say, an operative for the exposure time, what they tend to do is they tend to give you how long it takes them to do the job. Yeah. So if they say it's a particular job lasts 4 hours, initially they may start off as, well, I've been using the tool for 4 hours, but it's the actual trigger time that you're interested in. So when you actually start to quiz them a bit more, well, yeah, but you had a smoke break in there or lunch break in there for half an hour or so. Oh yeah, I did. And you can actually find out and then drill it down, no pun intended, to something what could be 3-4 hours, could be maybe 1 hour or so of trigger time. And that's what you've got to try and determine, so that you get a more accurate idea of what the exposures are.
Yeah. So you said that you know, in certain sectors there's this kind of, from an operator perspective, perhaps overlooking of it. You know, it's just part of the job, or it's, you know, I'm sort of a bit macho and I'm not going to worry about this. Do you also find, so that's clearly a problem? Do you also find that there's an issue when it comes to kind of companies understanding when or when not their staff are exposed to this risk, and therefore their approach to managing it?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I find you can find out when you certainly start to talk to a company about this is really is one of culture. It's like, well, we don't see that problem. It's not. It's a long-term problem in the sense that, you know, it's not like slips, trips, and falls or cuts and bruises where the person gets injured immediately. They see, well, the person is bleeding. It's something that is a very long-term sort of injury, and it's not very apparent to them that there is the potential of getting injured from these vibration tools, and that's the experience that that's what I've experienced. It's still there is a lot of lack of awareness of this, of a HAVS injury, and I've actually found this out by doing a couple of polls on social media platforms, where they do say that they've actually, in first, second, and third place across those social media platforms, the first thing was the lack of awareness of HAVS, and these are health and safety managers who are actually saying that. And then in the second place is the lack of a risk assessment, or if a risk assessment was carried out, it was substandard. And in third place is the controls that have been implemented, or if controls were implemented, they were substandard. So it's all these factors that determine the risk of HAVS occurring in their workplace.
So how do you go about then getting in front of people, or sort of making them change that perception? It's something I'm obviously interested in, because, you know, there's a parallel with what I do, and everybody in my world is aware of the risk, but maybe don't feel it applies to them. Whereas in your world, perhaps people are less aware of the risk and still don't feel it applies to them. So kind of what are some of the strategies that you're employing to try to educate people and get in front of more people to have a positive impact?
Well, it is quite challenging because hearing damage. I mean, I'll just give it an example. Hearing damage, it's less challenging when it comes to hearing damage to make them aware of the signs of hearing damage, because there's signs of noise all around you. But when it comes to vibration, it's something that is just focused in industry. And there are other more challenges in industry, because again, things like cuts and falls, slips, falling off scaffolding, falling from height, those are the ones where they feel those are they could be a lot more life-threatening. So, and that's one reason why those are high up pushed high up the priority ladder. And its HAVS is hand-arm vibration is the poor relation. So that tends to be kicked to the curb. And the other thing is that, I shouldn't say this, but there's health and safety managers who reckon that, well, it's a long-term injury. So by that time, I may have moved on. So it's somebody else's problem. And that's where the challenge is. And I try to educate them by, what are the consequences? Because litigation is quite a big problem when it comes to hand-arm vibration, and those sort of things are not really publicized. If there was an open database on that, I think when people see that sort of information there, and that might stir them to actually do something. Yeah.
I think as well that stories help. I'm going to ask you about some stories in a minute, but stories help. Personal stuff helps, bringing out examples. But I think the challenge is that, if people let it go, again, another difference would be that, a lot of slips, for example, yes, they might be a broken wrist or a broken ankle or whatever, but that's the kind of thing that typically will heal. Whereas actually what you're preventing are life-altering injuries that once, as you say, once they're done,
Yeah.
you can't recover from them. So
Yeah.
to some extent, there's kind of, arguably, a greater sort of duty of care, or a greater need to worry about that from that perspective, because you don't want people going home and never being able to lead their lives again. And if there is any kind of prosecution or civil claim brought, then I'd have thought that the numbers would start to get very high very quickly, because you are changing people's lives for the worse.
Yeah. Well, you talk about an outcome of such an irreversible injury. There is a consultant also in the field of hand-arm vibration, quite a respected consultant, and he has related the story where somebody's hand-arm vibration injury was so disabling that it affected their ability to use toilet paper.
Wow.
So, I mean, what can get worse than that?
Yeah, there's no dignity in that, is there?
Yeah, that's right. In the very worst cases, in the extreme cases, there's things like amputation may result. But it has to get that bad for that to happen. But normal everyday activities, which we take for granted, like trying to assemble a kid's toy. When you do have your grandchild's toy, when you do have these injuries, it makes it a challenge to do that sort of thing. Go watch a football match, or wash your car. It's all these daily things that, like I said, we take for granted, but those become quite challenging to fulfill when you do have this sort of injury.
Even using your phone and things like that, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, that's another consultant that said it has affected the ability, or it can affect the ability of somebody to use a smartphone. I mean, in this day and age, it's not. This something like this is it's quite a serious injury to have if that is the case.
Yeah,
right
certainly not to be sniffed at. That's for sure.
Yeah.
So that's some examples of when it can go wrong. Then, what about? Have you got any stories of kind of good case studies where companies have, really grabbed the bull by the horns and been proactive and taken some preventative steps, and what are the kind of successes that they've seen as a result of doing that?
Yeah, well, there's one particular example I have where the company went from effectively not understanding this issue at all to after I took them through a journey where they have implemented proper controls. It started off where the managers in that organization were concerned about litigation in HAVS, because they had heard from their peers in the industry that in one other company that somebody was taken to court or the organization lost they failed in their defense. The claimant was successful, and they were a bit terrified that that sort of thing would have happened to them. So they, not knowing much about hand-arm vibration, thought they could carry out a risk assessment themselves. They went ahead and did the measurements so that they could see what the level of risks were, and then the intention was to implement controls accordingly. Unfortunately, they didn't know what they didn't know. So they actually did the measurements incorrectly, using incorrect equipment.
Right.
So that they asked me to sanitize the results, and then I found out that they'd used incorrect equipment because the measurements didn't seem to make sense, after you quiz them a bit more. So I think they put their hands up and said, right, okay, we'll scrap all of that. You come here and carry out the risk assessment with all the tools that we have. So I went in there, did the correct measurements, and found out, there were residual risks where they did require, there were poor practices in place. Equipment was not well looked after. Consumables were worn. And that tends to increase the vibration levels and therefore increase the risks. So I looked at all the working practices that they had or the lack of, and determined their risks. And they found out that they had to implement legally training awareness, which they didn't have. And their health surveillance was a bit substandard. So although I'm not a health surveillance expert, I advised them on how to go about looking for competent health surveillance. And then, having done that, then they asked me to see if I could offered training of some sort, because again, that's something that they legally were required to implement. I went in there, did the training, made them aware of the symptoms of HAVS, the need to report the symptoms there, to have a reporting process to report the symptoms in between health surveillance, which was carried out annually.
Yeah.
So I put all that in place. They started to appreciate it. And one thing about training is that you have to make it, it cannot be death by PowerPoint, because people tend to just switch off. So it was a bit of a challenge to try and make it as interesting to them as possible. So I used their scenarios in their work scenarios and made them aware of the risks that they were up against. And that sort of piqued their interest and their enthusiasm. And they became more emboldened. Controls, the kind of controls to implement, even something like purchase policies, where you don't just go out and purchase a tool, open your week's catalog and say, I'll have some of that. What they need to do is look at, compare various tools, because now, like I said, the tools, you look at the vibration levels of the tools under the manufacturer's declared data, and then you look to acquire safer tools, trial them if possible, all these sort of things that push in the right direction. And I mean, after about, it was a good few months, they became more aware of where the risks lie, and the right processes, best practice methods, the need to service tools if they are in poor working condition, replace worn consumables. There's all these things push in the right direction. And that was quite a transformation. I was pretty pleased that it went that way.
They must have been pleased.
It is a journey. It's an educational journey. That's the way I look at it. From knowing nothing about it to being to now being, yes, we can take care of ourselves. And now I understand that they're actually training somebody in there to be competent in hand down vibration. Brilliant. That's if that's the effect I had, I'm so they're actually having a trainer in there for that, and I think that's what I look for in an outcome.
No, that's great. And I suppose for them, they now have more certainty. They've got reduced risk.
Yes.
And they've also got the proof and the evidence in the event of anything happening.
Yes.
They can demonstrate. Well, look, we've taken this seriously. We've gone above and beyond, and therefore,
they've done what they had to do. I think the other very important thing is the documentation, because if your documentation is poor, it doesn't matter all these controls you implement. If the documentation is poor and there is an issue when it comes to civil claims, it's very difficult, because you haven't got much standing in your favor. So documentation is incredibly important, and that's what they realized, this business. Their documentation at the end was pretty tip-top. So,
we covered that recently on the podcast with the barrister Matthew Snar. And,
that's right.
And I've made those points have been made as well by lawyers in the past too. It's kind of of course you want to understand what you are going to say you're going to do, and make sure that what you think you're doing and what you want to do are correct. But if you can't prove that you've actually done it, then that doesn't really help you too much.
It doesn't. No, it doesn't. Yeah.
So what does the future look like in terms of HAVS, Satish? Because obviously in many aspects of life, we're moving towards more automation, robotics, and sort of things like that. Is this going to be a risk that is sort of slowing down a little bit going forward, do you think? Or are there certain kinds of tasks that this is always going to be, in particular professions, a risk? Is it going to get worse because we're the people that are doing it are going to be more sort of specialized and therefore having larger exposures? Where do you see things going?
I see things, I see cases of HAVs falling, generally the trend. If you look on the HIC website and you look at there's a graph there, there's a chart there on the incidences of HAVs that they've picked up or recorded over the years. And you can see the general, it's generally tending to reduce. And you're right about the automation, and the neo tools, neo technology, much safer tools. And also now, safer tools mean less risk to vibration harm. Automation, you've virtually eliminated vibration. There's no need for an operative there in many cases. And also the other thing is that times are changing where the younger workforce tend to be more aware of the need to protect themselves. So for them, it's easy to adopt to safety procedures, unlike what I've encountered in the past, where you have the older mentality, well, it can't happen to me, the macho image, that seems to be going, slowly sliding away. You get more conscientious younger members of staff or employees who are pretty conscientious about keeping a healthy lifestyle. And so I think, I'm quite optimistic for the future that this is an injury that can be eradicated. Let's see what happens. But I do find people are getting more and more. They can be, especially the younger generation, are getting more wised up to this sort of thing. Still a bit of a way to go, but I think we can move forward in this respect.
Good stuff. So grounds to be optimistic, which is always a good thing when it comes to talking about safety and risk management issues. Drawing the interview to a close then, Satish, you've given a bit of an indication of kind of how you've helped that particular customer in terms of case studies, but it'd be good just to explain what exactly you can offer within your business, and then also if you've got any materials that you'd like to plug, or if you'd like to sort of give people the best way of getting in touch with you, for example LinkedIn, then the floor is yours to give us a bit of a pitch.
Okay, well, on my LinkedIn, you can say get in touch with me on LinkedIn, and I always try to put out educational content out there on LinkedIn, raising awareness, how to do things correctly, and snippets of information that is available on LinkedIn. What you can, as far as my services are concerned, I'm actually trying to go. I'm trying to encourage a turnkey package where it is awareness that is quite important. So what I do is I do carry out organizations where there is a risk in there of this injury, carry out a risk assessment, and also try and provide education, training. Because quite often you find that there are residual risks in there where training is a legal requirement. So that is something where a risk assessment is required. You know that you require training, and those two go quite hand in hand. So once you've got your risk assessment done and the training in there, and providing you have good health surveillance, which is something that I don't cover, providing you have good health surveillance in there, the risk assessment will determine what the controls you implement. Providing you implement the controls, training, and health surveillance, then that'll cover you. That'll cover an organization. It's just mainly those three elements. And that's how I can help organizations. And perhaps if anybody wishes to connect with me on LinkedIn, just have a read at my content, and hopefully that'll give them assurance that I'll be able to help them.
Perfect. Well, thanks very much, Satish. Really enjoyed speaking with you, and I can certainly recommend your posts because they are informative and educational and add a lot of value. So
Thank you, Christian.
Do follow Satish, and do join us next week on the podcast where our guest is going to be Simon Jones, the safety salesman, talking about his new book. So I look forward to seeing you then.
Thank you very much, Christian.
Cheers.
Cheers. Bye.
Thanks for joining us on the Safety and Risk Success podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, please hit follow and do share on social media. Does anyone you know spring to mind as a great guest, even yourself? If so, please contact us on podcast@slipsafety.co.uk See you next week for another episode.